And once again, we have Alastair McClymont from McClymont Associates, who's here to give a lot of knowledge on immigration. And sometimes, Alastair, just to let you know, people have called me to ask for some immigration questions, and I told them it's not me, go to Alastair.
Yeah.
He's the right guy, he's the guy to talk about immigration, all in, all about. So, I have some questions that people have sent me. I want to ask you as their representative.
Sure.
And a lot of questions, if you want to ask, please send through so I can ask Alastair, or you can also go directly on the numbers flashing or the email address for Alastair. Alastair, the resident application for skilled migrants. I remember in 2020 after COVID, we were given gifts of residencies. What's changed from then to now, and what is it that people need to get residencies approved now? Is it so difficult, or is it easy as?
Okay, the gifts you're talking about happened in 2021. That was a one-off.
Yeah.
We're probably not going to see that again for another decade or so.
Okay.
That was all to do with COVID. Pre-COVID, we had a skilled migrant category where people, various qualifications, trades, jobs can get residency. The previous Labor government changed that completely. We're now skilled migrant, you can only do it if you've got a skilled job offer. It really favours those people with university qualifications, and it rewards those people on high salaries. So what it's taken out is a whole middle group of people, mostly in the trades, in hospitality, and retail. All of those things are basically gone, where those people have no pathway to residency. That's the biggest change that's happened, and that's something I expect we'll see go back more to normal next year.
But who then can get the residency now? No one.
Well, that's the difficulty. You've either got to be have a university qualification and then a skilled job, or you've got to be on a very high salary, because the previous Labor government associated skilled with high salary and university educated. So for example, a tradesperson that comes from the UK might have 10 years experience in the trades, but there's no pathway to residency, which seems to be insane when you're working in construction and you need skilled tradespeople, and there's no pathway for residency. So I don't know how the government expects that these people are going to want to come here when there's no pathway to residency, because only when you're a resident can you do things like buy homes. So it's really nonsense policy, and it is going to change. The minister's talked about making changes next year.
Perfect. So basically we should expect a lot of changes in that part. So hopeful, positive. What's changed for student visas, Alastair? What's happening in that space?
Very similar. What you've got to understand is the whole skilled migrant policy and the student visa policy, they kind of fit in with each other, right? So when I talked about residence policies favouring those people with university qualifications, that's reflected in the student visa policy, where people are just not getting student visas now for those lower level diploma courses, level 4, level 5, because there is simply no pathway to residency for them. And if there's no pathway to residency, nobody's going to want to come here and study. If they're not going to come here and study those courses, then schools and agencies are not going to be providing that product. So those schools and those education agencies selling those low-level courses have died down because there is no pathway to residency. And there's nothing really that sort of fills in that vocational gap with good vocational skills, apart from the healthcare and those sorts of things. But if we look at something like hospitality and cooking, that student visa space has pretty much died because there's no pathway to residency. So skilled migrant categories, student visa categories, they really work in combination. And so it really favours those doing university qualifications and postgraduate qualifications at the moment. And
only then, after that, you're getting a high paid salary. Only then you can get a residency pathway.
Yeah, well, this is the problem with the previous government's focus on the high-paid salaries. They expected that someone coming in with a university qualification is automatically going to get a high salary, whereas we all know that the reality is that when you're a migrant into a new country, you've got to work your way up into those high salaries, and that's a barrier that the previous government has put in the way of really hard-working, qualified, skilled migrants and gaining residency here. Is that this expectation is that they're going to walk straight into a high-paid job, which hardly ever happens unless you're in one of those really sort of small set of occupations where we have an extremely high demand.
Wow. And that takes me to my next question. What is this fee increase and longer visas? What is about Because I've seen a lot of people talking about fee increases, get ready, this is changing, that's changing. But what is actually the change and why?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the fees, pretty much doubled at the start of October. A lot of people rushed to get applications in, which, could potentially be a problem. But, really, basically, the government is just trying to, save money, and they're trying to, have enough income coming in to fund Immigration New Zealand. I don't really think it's going to put too many people off, because if someone's committed hundreds of thousands of dollars into applying for residency here, then an increase of a couple of $1,000s is not a big deal. What my concern is that you're paying all of this money to get residency when you've got policies which are full of holes. You've got immigration officers that really don't know what they're doing sometimes. You've got really sort of vague rules. You've got a lot of people giving advice about residency that also really don't know what they're doing. So people are risking a hell of a lot of money when they're applying for residency, and they expect a much better quality of service, not only from their agents, but from Immigration New Zealand. And if Immigration New Zealand want to charge $5,000 for residency, they really need to upskill their own policies and their own staff to make sure people are getting value for the money, and that's not happening.
And do you think it's going to happen?
No, because Immigration New Zealand face the same problem that everyone else is facing, finding good, skilled, qualified staff. And having an immigration officer being trained for 2 weeks and then deciding a resident visa application that somebody's paid $5,000 in fees for, what do you think is going to happen? If I want to pay $5,000 for something, I want someone who's got a decade's worth of experience, not someone who's had 2 weeks of training.
But there's no talent. That's what I'm saying. If you want to get talent, there's no pathway to residency. So it all connects back into a cycle of...
If you had a very simple, straightforward immigration policies that everybody could see how you can qualify, and there are very clear policies, then it probably wouldn't be a problem. But we have the exact opposite. We have completely incoherent policies. They're contradictory, they are vague. Immigration officers can't apply them because they can't interpret them properly. Even the Immigration Protection Tribunal, experienced immigration lawyers, have trouble trying to understand the policies that are created, because the people in Wellington who make these policies have zero experience working in migrant communities. They don't know how the migrant economy works, and they make up these policies after 3-4 years of training in a university doing an arts degree, with zero experience of how migration works and how migrant economy works. So you're going to have nonsense policies. You're going to have immigration officers who don't really know how to interpret nonsense policies, and that's why something like the skilled migrant category, the success rate on appeal was almost 50%. So they were getting half of the applications wrong. Bad policy, untrained immigration officers, and the rest of it is just complete disaster.
But we are such a country where we want to grow, we want to do a balance. We say we care about communities, we care about people. But what you're telling me is actually an eye-opener, because what do we care about? Making wrong policies?
Well, I mean, the thing is, the government departments, they tend to, very much, their priority is about, protecting their own interests. Making sure that they can maintain their budgets, make sure that the people in management positions can keep their jobs and sort of keep their salaries, make sure, that they look good. So you've got immigration policies that were implemented which turned out to be a complete and total disaster, such as the accredited employer work visa. And you can see that the policy was designed primarily to make Immigration New Zealand's job easier, to make them process applications quicker without having any sort of oversight, and they didn't really care less about the consequences for the migrants or for the wider community, because their priority was looking after their own interests. The only way you can protect from that is by having an immigration minister who knows bullshit when they see it and calls it out and tells the officials, no, that's wrong, that's not how to do it. But the jury is out on whether or not we have a minister like that. We're going to have to wait and see. But history isn't good, because frankly we've never had a minister who knows what they're doing.
Anyways, any part? Just immigration.
Yeah, well, I can only speak about immigration.
Well, I don't know anything else. Well, that brings me, there was a recent change to ANSCO. First of all, as a layman, I don't understand what that was. So if you can explain me, and was it abolished? Was it removed? What is the whole conspiracy?
Yeah.
Or,
ANSCO is created by Australian and New Zealand governments, where they have a a classification of occupations and skill levels. It was a statistical tool. It was never designed for immigration purposes. And it was very, very outdated. And then Immigration New Zealand tried to use that tool as a way of determining who was skilled and who was not skilled. It was inherently contradictory. It had huge gaps. So you had occupations that everybody knows that exists in the economy, but then you go to the ANSCO and it doesn't exist. So you have a whole bunch of immigration officers trying to fit round pegs into square holes. It was a complete disaster. Everybody said that it was a complete disaster. I talked before about almost 50% of skilled migrant applications that went to appeal were successful on appeal. The vast majority of those were because of the interpretation of the ANSCO document. Everyone has been telling Immigration New Zealand and the ministers that ANSCO is a complete disaster and needs to go. And then, when changes were made to the accredited employer work visa policy this year, what did they do? They brought back ANSCO, and it's been a disaster ever since. But luckily, there's now been an announcement that in November, ANSCO's gone and is going to be replaced instead by an occupations list. And fingers crossed that we have some sensible people that make the occupations list, because if it's going to be the same Immigration New Zealand policymakers who make it, it's going to be another disaster. So hopefully the minister has outsourced it to someone who has some common sense and actually understands how the migrant economy works. But I'm not holding my breath for that.
Wow, that's a lot to take. But I want to ask you a question which is based on all your experience in immigration over the years. You know, we talk about shortage of nurses, then we hire too many nurses. We talk about shortage of doctors now, I don't know what we'll do. You know, in 1999 we had an oversupply of doctors. Now we have an undersupply of doctors. And this supply, oversupply, undersupply keeps on changing. When do you think we will get it right to keep the supply and demand right? Yes, because in our industry as well, it's either houses go up or the renters go down, or something keeps on changing. The equilibrium is difficult to achieve. And we all talk about balance. Do you think there's any balance?
Yeah, well, the problem is with doctors and nurses is that it's not just an Immigration New Zealand issue, okay? Because there's mandatory registration for those. So you've got to have two basic departments working together in conjunction and, you know, singing off the same song sheet and collaborating. So you have an immigration rule that looks pretty straightforward. Yeah, if you're registered as a doctor or nurse, you can apply for residence easily. But what about the registration part? That has nothing to do with Immigration New Zealand. That has to do with the medical board and registration. So what you find that a lot of the complaints that are coming out are to do with the ability of people to become registered here rather than it actually being the immigration problem. So those two really need to speak to each other. They need to cooperate with each other. The ideal solution would be a way that immigration works together with the medical sector and bringing in people to get them into work and get them into upskilling and training to obtain the registration so that they can get residency. So it has to be an overall holistic government plan on how we bring these people in, how we support them, and how we get them into work, into the areas of the country we need and into the specialties that we need. But at the moment, we don't seem to be talking to each other. Immigration New Zealand just says, show us your registration. Where on the other side, you've got people coming in and they've got all these barriers to registration, but they can't get the visas to actually work and fund themselves or to upskill. There are reasons why they need to upskill here in New Zealand. You used India for an example. There are very specific things about New Zealand health that they need to know about that you may not encounter in a country like India. That can be trained,
isn't it?
It can be trained, but so there is training that needs to be done before the registration. And it's not just about the cultural values, but there are also, particular medical ailments which are, very predominant in, Pacifica communities, Pacifica and Maori communities, for example, particularly in South Auckland, things like, rheumatic fever and stuff that people, medical staff really need to get a good handle on because it's a very specific New Zealand problem. So I agree that there is a level of upskilling and training that needs to be done. But again, the problem really is the coordination between the immigration side and the medical side. They need to talk together. It needs a holistic approach, and that seems to be what we don't have.
So basically, if we work as a team in different departments of government and immigration, everything, and look at the shortage and understand where we need skills, that could be the way to go. can really build back New Zealand or Aotearoa the way it should be.
And the other thing is that Immigration New Zealand needs to find a way, and we have a very unique problem in New Zealand, that we need to find a way that when we're going to bring people into the country, allow them to get residency, get them registered, that we don't lose them to Australia straight away.
Yes.
Okay? So in the immigration legislation, there is provision there to have conditions attached to the residency. So you could have a doctor coming in and saying, look, we'll give you a resident visa straight away, but the condition is that you need to work here in ICU or in the West Coast to the South Island for a period of 4 years. Otherwise, you lose your residency. Otherwise, you've got all these nurses, doctors coming in, they get their residency, boom, they're off to Australia the next day.
And that's what, it's a balance, it's a team approach towards all departments and us coming together and not just saying that my brother, my sister, my friend should come to New Zealand. It should be, what talent do we need and can we settle them as a talent and train them towards being Kiwis and helping be and buy Kiwis. Well, that's what
and as I say, the mechanisms are there in the legislation to actually direct people to different parts of the country, to different particular sectors. You could be saying to a nurse, for example, look, we'll give you a student visa, you can study a nursing qualification here, you get your residency when you graduate, but you have to go and work on the east coast of the North Island for 2 years in Gisborne Hospital, otherwise you're going to lose your residency. Something like that. The tools are there, the mechanisms are there, but what we don't have is we don't have the imagination from the politicians, we don't have the foresight. You have a bunch of politicians who are more concerned about how they get votes for the next election rather than what's good for the country.
And if they focus on what's good for the country, the votes will come as a byproduct.
Well, you'd like to think so.
I believe so, that should be the case, and that's where working as a country, as a team, as all our public, even the communities are whānau, we need to come together so the change can be seen at every level, not just at a level of your own individuality, but everybody. And thank you so much, Alastair, for coming.
Thanks for having me again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay.